It was supposed to be quiet. A lake at dawn, mist hanging low over the water. Birdsong began as the night loosened its grip. Then the silence broke. Not the calm kind, the wrong kind. Near the shoreline, a tent lay collapsed. The fabric was slashed. Nothing inside moved. During the early hours of June 5, 1960, 4 teenagers were sleeping beside Lake Bodom in southern Finland, a place known for still water and summer campers. By morning, 3 of them were dead. 1 was alive, badly injured, and unable to explain what had happened. No screams were reported that night. No nearby residents heard a struggle. There were no clear footprints leading away from the scene. When the bodies were discovered, the damage went beyond the violence itself. Onlookers entered the area. Evidence was disturbed. Early assumptions took hold before facts were secured. From the beginning, accounts conflicted. Witnesses described different figures near the lake. Physical evidence raised more questions than answers. The survivor would later say he remembered almost nothing after falling asleep. Decades later, he would be accused of the crime he lived through. How could an attack this brutal occur so close to a populated area without a confirmed witness? Why did every promising lead fade under closer examination? And why, more than 60 years later, does the Lake Bodom murder still resist closure? This is not a story with an ending. It is a record of a single night, a compromised investigation, and a truth that has remained out of reach, waiting beside a quiet Finnish lake. Before the mystery, there was normal life. School mornings, summer plans, teenage conversations that mattered only to the people having them. The group had chosen the lake because it felt safe, familiar even, a place locals knew. A place where nothing ever happened. The day was unremarkable in the best way. Laughter, packing supplies, small decisions that felt meaningless at the time. Where to pitch the tent, who slept where, what stories to tell before the light faded. The lake reflected the sky as evening came. The water was calm. The forest stood still. They settled in for the night believing morning was guaranteed. No alarms, no sense of danger, no reason to think this trip would be remembered at all. As darkness deepened, the world narrowed to the inside of a tent. Soft breathing, the rustle of fabric, the gentle sounds of nature nearby. Then, nothing. No confirmed noise, no verified interruption. Only what would later be discovered. When daylight returned, routines resumed elsewhere. Families expected them home, plans waited to be fulfilled. But at the lake, time stopped. A tent that should have been empty by breakfast wasn't. A silence that should have ended didn't. And somewhere between night and morning, a line had been crossed, one that could never be uncrossed. This is the last moment where certainty exists. Everything after this fractures. That evening, the teenagers had traveled from nearby towns, carrying simple supplies and borrowed equipment. 2 were 15, 2 were 18, bound by friendship and the promise of a summer weekend away from routine. They were seen along the road earlier that night, walking toward the campsite with a tent and fishing gear, unhurried and unafraid. Locals later recalled nothing unusual. No arguments, no strangers, no raised voices drifting through the trees. The area was known for campers, and a tent by the water did not draw attention. Night settled in quietly, the kind that convinces you nothing will interrupt it. Hours later, at first light, a passerby noticed the tent still standing and approached. What they found would mark the moment the ordinary ended. Authorities were called. By the time help arrived, the night had already taken everything it was going to take. This section of the story matters because it is uncontested. These moments, these movements, these quiet choices are the last points where agreement exists. Beyond them, accounts diverge, evidence falters, and certainty begins to disappear. It is here, at the edge of normal life, that the mystery truly begins. Not with violence, but with the sudden absence of explanation. Everything that follows will be shaped by what cannot be recovered, and by what was lost before anyone realized it mattered, leaving questions time has never answered. The response came quickly, but not carefully. By the time police reached the campsite on the morning of June 5th, the scene beside Lake Bodom murders had already drawn a crowd. Curious locals and soldiers from a nearby garrison gathered around the collapsed tent, leaving behind a maze of overlapping footprints. What might have been a clear trail of evidence became a puzzle too blurred to read. Investigators began their work under the bright summer sun, surrounded by the noise of onlookers. The first impressions were chaotic: torn tent fabric, blood-stained ground, missing personal items. The one surviving teenager, found dazed and bleeding outside the tent, was rushed to a hospital before officers could fully question him. What he remembered was fragmented, a flash of movement, pain, confusion, and then nothing. Still, police believed they could piece it together. This was not a city crime. It had happened in open space, near familiar paths. Someone must have seen something. Detectives mapped out the area, measuring distances, photographing the damage, and collecting what they could before weather or time erased more. They noted the direction of the slashes through the tent's fabric, suggesting an attack from the outside. A few items were missing: a pair of motorcycle keys, some wallets, and one pair of shoes. Investigators assumed robbery might have been a motive, but robbery didn't fit the brutality of what had taken place. Within hours, early theories began to form. Some officers suspected a drifter or escaped prisoner. Others pointed to a local man known for hostility toward campers. As the media caught wind of the case, speculation spread faster than the investigation could control it. Witnesses came forward. Some claimed they had seen a light near the lake before dawn. Others mentioned a man walking away from the area. Their descriptions clashed: different heights, different clothing, even different hair color. One pair of bird watchers said they had glimpsed a blonde man leaving the woods, but their account would later be questioned. The police tried to keep faith in the process. They followed each thread, certain one would hold. Officers searched the surrounding forest, dragged the lake, and interviewed local residents. Every effort promised progress, yet each ended in contradiction. The knife and the blunt object used in the attack were never found. Blood traces on nearby rocks and fabric revealed violence, but not identity. Even the survivors' belongings seemed confusing. Some items scattered, others intact. Nothing arranged the way it should have been if the motive were clear. Days turned into weeks. Urgency gave way to frustration. The families pleaded for answers. The public demanded results. The case became front-page news across Finland, a crime so unthinkable it shattered the country's sense of safety. Then the tone shifted. Investigators realized they were no closer to understanding the truth than they had been that first morning. Promising suspects were released for lack of evidence. Witness accounts began to contradict earlier statements. Rumors replaced facts. And slowly, confidence began to crumble. By midsummer, what had started as a determined search for justice became a struggle to keep the case from slipping away entirely. Officers rotated, files multiplied, but no single narrative held. The investigation that began with certainty now teetered on confusion. And then, almost quietly, the leads stopped. What remained was a fractured timeline, a community full of questions, and a survivor whose silence became part of the mystery itself. The first stage of hope was over. The long shadow of doubt had begun, and with it, the beginning of a case that would haunt Finland for generations. Time became the enemy. Weeks turned into months, months into years. As summer ended, the urgency that once surrounded the case began to fade. Newspaper headlines grew smaller. Updates became less frequent. Investigators who had worked the scene in those first critical days were reassigned to other crimes, ones with clearer paths forward. But for those connected to the night by Lake Bodom, nothing moved on at all. Families waited for phone calls that never came. Friends replayed final conversations, searching for meaning that hadn't existed at the time. The silence left behind by the investigation became its own presence, filling the space where answers should have been. Questions followed the survivor everywhere. So did suspicion. In the absence of clarity, doubt settled in quietly, fed by rumors and half-formed theories. Without official conclusions, public opinion shifted unpredictably, attaching itself to fragments rather than facts. As years passed, memories began to change. Witnesses who once spoke with certainty struggled to recall details. Timelines blurred, descriptions softened. What had once felt urgent became distant, shaped by retelling in time. Statements taken early no longer aligned with recollections offered later, and the reliability of each account weakened. Evidence aged poorly. Physical materials collected at the scene reflected investigative standards of another era, long before modern forensic practices. Items that might have yielded answers decades later had already been handled, contaminated, or lost. What remained could no longer speak clearly. Yet one detail refused to disappear. A piece of the story lingered, something investigators could never reconcile. Not a single object or witness, but a gap. A moment that resisted explanation. A question that survived every attempt to close the case. Why had the attack unfolded the way it did? Why did nothing align cleanly afterward? Each return to the file reopened the same uncertainty. By the late 1960s, the case was officially considered unsolved. Periodic reviews brought renewed attention, but no resolution. Suspects were discussed, dismissed, and sometimes revisited, only to lead back to the same dead ends. Decades later, advances in forensic science offered a brief sense of hope. Old evidence was re-examined. New interpretations were proposed. The case resurfaced in the public eye, reminding Finland and the world that the questions had never been answered. But even with renewed scrutiny, certainty remained elusive. Cold cases do not end when files are closed. They persist quietly, shaped by absence rather than discovery. They live in unanswered questions, in doubts passed down over time, and in stories that refuse to settle. The Lake Bodom case did not fade away. It lingered, unchanged by time, yet weighted down by it. Some believe the answer was overlooked early, lost to haste, confusion, and a scene that could not speak clearly once it was disturbed. Others believe the truth was present from the beginning, examined, documented, and then quietly misunderstood. One of the earliest theories centers on familiarity. The attack appeared deliberate, targeted, and swift. The campsite was not hidden, but it was not random either. This has led some investigators to question whether the person responsible knew the area well, its footpaths, its cover, the distance to nearby roads. Lake Bodom was not an isolated wilderness, but it was predictable to those who spent time there. Familiarity could explain how the attacker arrived unnoticed and left without being clearly tracked. Another theory focuses on the sightings reported that morning. Several witnesses claim to have seen a man near the lake around the time of the attack. The descriptions varied. Hair color, clothing, posture. Details did not align cleanly. Yet the reports never disappeared entirely. They remained in the background of the case, too inconsistent to rely on, but too persistent to ignore. Investigators were left with a dilemma: discard the accounts entirely, or accept that memory, even when sincere, can distort under stress and time. There are also theories built around opportunity. The location was accessible. Campers were common. Someone passing through could have encountered the group by chance. This line of thinking raises questions about motive. If robbery was the intent, why was the violence so extreme? If it was personal, why did no clear connection ever surface? Each possible motive creates new problems instead of solutions. Behavior after the crime has also drawn attention. Certain individuals were scrutinized for actions that appeared unusual in hindsight, statements that shifted, timelines that changed, reactions that seemed out of step with expectations. Yet behavior alone proves nothing. Stress, shock, and fear can alter how people speak and act, especially under public scrutiny. Investigators were forced to ask whether suspicion was being shaped by perception rather than evidence. Decades later, advances in forensic science briefly reopened old questions. Items collected from the scene were re-examined with modern techniques. Bloodstains, fabric, and footwear were analyzed again, raising new interpretations but no definitive conclusions. Instead of clarity, the results added another layer of uncertainty, challenging assumptions made long ago without providing a clear alternative. Throughout these reassessments, one issue remained constant. The early hours of the investigation may have set limits that could never be undone. Investigators questioned whether the contamination of the scene altered the entire course of the case. They questioned whether initial theories narrowed focus too soon. They questioned whether later efforts were constrained by decisions made before the full picture was understood. They also questioned memory itself. Witnesses recalled events differently as time passed. Statements taken years apart no longer matched earlier accounts. This did not imply dishonesty, but it highlighted how fragile recollection can be. Memory does not preserve events, it reshapes them. No single theory stands alone. Each one explains part of the story while leaving another part unresolved. Each collapses under the same weight. There is no single piece of proof that closes the circle. And so the mystery remains open, not because no one tried, but because certainty was never reached. This is where the audience steps in. What would you trust? Eyewitness accounts shaped by time? Physical evidence gathered under outdated standards? Behavior that feels unsettling but cannot be measured? The Lake Bodom case endures because it demands interpretation, and interpretation without resolution has no final answer. The absence of answers became a life sentence, not for one person, but for everyone left behind. In the years that followed, the case stopped being an investigation and became a presence. It lived quietly in conversations cut short, in anniversaries marked without ceremony, in questions that were never spoken out loud. For the families, grief did not arrive with closure. It arrived unfinished, carrying a constant knowledge that the truth remained somewhere beyond reach. Communities learned to live around unanswered questions. Families learned to carry them. In Espoo and beyond, the murders altered how people thought about safety. A place once associated with leisure and summer outings became a reminder that certainty can vanish without warning. Parents looked at familiar landscapes differently. Ordinary locations took on a new weight, shaped not by what happened often, but by what happened once and could not be explained. For the survivor, life moved forward under a shadow. Without a clear account of the night, every step was followed by speculation. Silence became both protection and burden. Each passing decade added distance from the event, yet never removed its influence. The lack of answers did not loosen its grip. It tightened it, reshaping identity through doubt rather than truth. Time did not resolve the pain. It reorganized it. As years passed, the case shifted from personal tragedy to cultural memory. It entered books, documentaries, and public discussion, not because it was solved, but because it wasn't. Each retelling carried the same unresolved core, reminding audiences that some questions survive every attempt to bury them. Silence became permanent. Investigators retired. Witnesses passed away. Evidence aged beyond usefulness. What remained were records, fragments, and the steady understanding that the truth might never be known in full. Not because it lacked importance, but because it arrived too late for certainty to hold. Because not knowing doesn't fade, it settles. It settles into the spaces where answers should be, into family histories shaped by absence, into a collective awareness that justice is not guaranteed by effort alone. The Lake Bodom case endures not as a puzzle to be solved, but as a reminder of what unresolved violence leaves behind. Not just unanswered questions, but altered lives. Not just doubt, but endurance. And in that endurance lies the heaviest truth of all, that some mysteries do not end. They remain quiet, unresolved, and deeply human. The lake still looks the same, still quiet, still calm, still unassuming. Water moves gently along the shoreline. Trees stand where they always have. To someone passing by today, there is nothing to suggest that this place once marked the beginning of a mystery that has endured for more than 6 decades. But the silence now carries memory. The question we opened with remains unanswered, not because it lacks importance, but because it resists certainty. What happened during those early hours by the water? What detail was overlooked in the rush to understand the unthinkable? And how many stories like this remain suspended in time, waiting for someone willing to look again, listen again, and question what was once accepted? The Lake Bodom case is remembered because it wasn't solved. It's remembered because it wasn't. Because effort did not guarantee answers. Because truth, once disrupted, proved difficult to restore. For the families, the community, and those who continue to study the case, the search never truly ended. It simply changed form, from investigation to reflection, from urgency to endurance. Unsolved does not mean forgotten. It means unfinished. And sometimes the act of remembering is the only justice that remains. If this story stayed with you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more carefully researched true crime documentaries like this one, like this video and subscribe, so these stories and the questions they leave behind continue to be told.